Here, I'm going to show you how to loop through a set of data like this here, and then based on a set of conditions or a specific condition, copy that data to another worksheet tab, and then at the end, delete the data that you copied over. Before we start, check the video description and click the link to TeachExcel so you can download the files for the tutorial and follow along. And make sure to subscribe and accept notifications so you can see all the new tutorials. All right, so the data set that I have here is a very simple data set. It could be sales data from a point of sale system, a POS system, or really anything. It doesn't matter as long as it's in this kind of format. So we have ID, name, item, value, notes, and input time. Let's say I bring in the new data on this worksheet and I want to have it transferred over to this one. Easy peasy. All right, first things first, let's go to the VBA window, Alt F11. Go to Insert and Module. Now let's make the container for the macro. Let's call this one sub move stuff. Now in the last tutorial I showed you how to loop through data using a for each loop, which is really cool and really nice. But when you're looping through data like we're going to do here, it's not going to work so well. It's not going to be very effective. So we have to use the for next loop. So we start with a for, and then this is where it gets kind of tricky. So what we need to do now is we need to declare a variable. So I need to say, let's call it I, that's usually what it is. And I need to give the variable a value, so a numeric value, and I'm going to say it equals 1. And this is how the loop keeps track of what's going on. So for I equals 1, and then we say how far we want it to go. Let's say that we want it to go to 5. So now our loop is going to go from 1 to 5, and it's going to, in this variable I right here, it's going to keep track of which loop it's in. So it's going to say we're in 1, then it's going to go up by 1 and go to 2, then 3, then 4, then 5. But at the end, we need to tell it next I. So we need to put next and then the variable that we input up here. You could put basically whatever you wanted for the variable. However, it's easier to keep it small and simple, and in a lot of examples you will see I used. So you'll notice why later. It's easier to keep it small, but you could put a big variable up here if you wanted to. You could call it my counter. I mean, it's pretty easy, and then you just make sure to go my counter down here. So that's not set in stone, but leaving it at I is easy and commonly used. And what this is going to do, I'm going to go back to the worksheet real quick, is this I'm setting up to loop through this data here. So I have 5 rows of data, and I want our for loop to go through all 5 of them. Let's go back here. Now we have our basic loop, for I equals 1 to 5, and next I. But this has nothing to do with the worksheet right now. I'm going to show you through the message box once again. I love using this. Let's output the I, message box I. Now let's go ahead and run the macro. Instead of going back to the worksheet, we can hit the play button here or F5, and it will take you to the currently visible worksheet within the spreadsheet and run the macro. So you can see I is 1, I'm going to hit enter, 2, 3, 4, 5, and now the loop is done. So when I hit enter, no more pop-ups. So that is what's happening right now. And this is going to be the structure or the basis upon which we essentially build this entire tutorial. We want to loop through our data. Now we've created the loop. But it's not too terribly helpful right now. Not yet, because we haven't gotten any data. So I'm going to show you a new way to get data instead of using range. Usually we were using range like this, and then dot value. But that doesn't really work so well when we're doing a for loop. Of course, I could just iterate that and make it go up, but there's another really helpful way to access individual cells, and it's by using cells. So we type cells, open parentheses, and we can say the row of the cell and the column of the cell. And now we've referenced cell A1 the same way that we've referenced it with the range. So I'm going to go ahead and put this in a note. Range A1 equals cells 1, 1. Just to leave that in there and help to make it a little bit more clear. Now let's go ahead and output the values from the cells using this cells right here. So I'm going to make my message box. Now cells, and remember the I iterates. It increases by 1, and our rows are numbers. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, really simple. So for the row index, I put I. Now for the column index, I can tell it which column do I want it to get it from. Let's go with column B. So we can get the names. It's kind of fun. So 2. Now, just like with range, we can put pretty much everything behind this that we would with range, and we wanted to get the value. So we type dot value. So just like it was range, except for now we're using cells, which allows us to input the numbers directly into it. So Alt F11, Alt F8, run the macro. Oh, I still got the first one running. Easy way to get out of this is to hit Control Break, although on laptops it's hard to find Control Break. So let's quickly iterate through that. Comment out message box, so put a single quote to comment out a line of code so it won't run again. All right, run the macro. So we get name. Notice here it's still going through the very first row. I'll show you how to fix that later. Hit enter. We get Thor, Spider-Man, Captain Morgan, Thanos, and it's done. So you can see it's very easy to go through the cells using this loop, and it's very easy to do something with the cells. This is really the magic trick that allows us to take the number from I, our variable up here, and translate it into something that allows us to do something with a cell. Okay, now that we know how to make the basic loop, how to get a value from a cell, I'm going to show you one thing that we need to do for this tutorial. This loop is interesting because we can change by how much it increments. If we type step and then a number here, let's say -1, we have now told the loop that we want it to go -1 for each loop. So it'll count down instead of counting up. In this example, let's just quickly go with a 2. So I'll show you it steps by 2. Then let's run it. You will see that it will not go through every cell. We have range because that's in row 1. Now it's going to step up by 2, so it should go to row 3, which will return Spider-Man. And then it should give us Thanos, row 5. And that's it. So by using step and then a number, we control how the number increments. Here I want it to go up 2. I could have it go up 3, 5, 10, 20. And if you put a negative number that says count down by 2 or count down by 1, this is often used when you want to reverse a loop, which is what we're going to do here. So I'm going to step it down by 1 and reverse it. Now when you do that, remember you have to change this over here because what this step is doing is it is changing the increment for this variable here, the I. So I right now is 1. So if I run this, it's just not going to work because it doesn't make any sense. So nothing happens. So what you need to do is you need to change I to a number that can be incremented down. So I equals 5, and 5 over here equals 1. So all I did was reverse this number because I is always going to end up at this number right here. So when I'm going in reverse, this number here needs to be lower than what I is set to. When I go forward, stepping positively or just removing step, then this number here needs to be higher than the 1 set for I. That may seem straightforward, or it might not, which is why I wanted to make sure that I clarified that. But for this tutorial, we need to do the loop in reverse. Now if I run this, you'll notice that it should go Thanos up to name. So Thanos, Captain Morgan, Spider-Man, Thor, name. Now we have the loop going from the bottom to the top of our data. All right, so don't worry about why just yet, but now let's make our macro work a little bit more efficiently. So instead of having to put these numbers in here by hand, let's do it automatically. First, I'll comment this out so it doesn't run. Here, I will show you how to get the very last row of a data set. So the very last row is this one here. All right, so we do sheets. You do want to make sure that you tell your macro which worksheet you want this to work on, because if you don't, it'll just work on the currently visible worksheet and it might not give you the results that you want. So sheets and the name of the sheet, sheet 1, and then we can do range. And now you type in the column that you want to use in order to find the last row. So if I go back here, let's say that some of this data is optional, such as notes. Well, I wouldn't want to use the notes column to find the last row, but let's say the ID number will always be filled out, so I want to use that to find the last row, because there will always be something here for a record. So if there is no ID record, then there is no row. You need to take that into account. All right, so range A, that's our column. And now here's the interesting part. We're going to build a normal range reference here, so we need to put a number. So I do a space and an ampersand and then rows.count. So what rows.count does is it's going to count the total number of rows in your worksheet. And it's better to put this than a hard-coded value, because if you're using an older version of Excel, it's not going to have as many rows. So to make your macro a little bit more versatile, use that. And what this is going to do is combine to be a value that looks like this one down here. Yeah. Okay, error checking is a little bit annoying. All right, A1. So essentially that's what we're trying to get. And the ampersand here is what connects the A here with a number that will be output the total number of rows in the worksheet right here. And this is not the total number that has data, it's the total in the entire worksheet. So this will come together to be A 1,041,000, whatever the hell. All right, so let's close the parentheses. But now once you have the largest row all the way at the bottom of the spreadsheet, you want to go up to find the last one. So we type dot end, open parentheses, XL up, close parentheses, and this will actually get us the very last row that has data in it as it relates to column A. Now to get the number, I type dot row. So this right here is going to get you the number of the row, the last row that has data. Let's go ahead and set that to a variable. I'm going to call it import last row. I'll put a note up here, get the last row of the import worksheet. And actually, I forgot that I did change the name of the worksheet, so the name of the worksheet is import. There we go. Now let's show you this in the workbook. Alt F11, Alt F8, enter. Row 5, so the row with Thanos. This is the very last row. It's very important to know if your data has other data below it way down here, because if I have a random thing like this, remember we use column A to check for the last row. Now I run the macro again, it'll give me column or row 11. So if you're importing data, just be wary of that. All right, so now we have a loop that runs. We're able to get values from cells, and we've got the last row of our import worksheet. So now we don't have to type this 5 in anymore. All we have to do is copy this and paste it right here. So now this says for I equals, and the result that this returned is 5. So for I equals 5 to 1, step down 1 each time. So each time it'll go from 5 to 4 to 3 to 2 to 1. Now before I move on, let me show you the other way that you could write this. Let's do import last row equals, and I'm going to show you how to do it using cells instead of range. Very similar. We first give it the sheet that we want to work with, and now we do dot cells. And remember here, we use numbers instead of the letters. So for the row, we do rows.count. row is the first argument for the cells. So then we do comma, and what column? Let's do column A, so 1. And remember, column A is 1, B is 2, C is 3, and so on. So cells rows count dot end Excel up dot row. So almost everything is exactly the same. I'll go ahead and comment out one of these and just leave one in there. And you can see that it works exactly the same. All right, now that we can nicely loop through the data, let's go ahead and copy it to the other worksheets. Copy data to new worksheet. And this is actually so easy. We're not going to take data from each individual cell. We're going to copy the entire row all at once. So first, we need to tell it what data we want to copy. Let's make sure we tell it which worksheet it will be from at first. Let's take the data from the import worksheet, and then let's tell it which data exactly. So cells, and then open parentheses, which row? Well, we're in the loop. We can use the I variable to tell it which row. Now, which column? Doesn't really matter what you put here, so I'm just going to put 1, close parentheses. Now, in order to copy the entire row, we type period entire row. Nice, simple, and easy. And in order to copy the entire row, we type period copy. So it really couldn't be easier. Now, all you have to do, 1 space, and then we tell it where we want it to go. So sheets, where do we want it to go? What was the name of the other one? Raw, all right, the raw worksheet. Then cells, and then where do we want it to go there? Open parentheses. Let's put it in the second row, starting with column A. Now let's comment this message box out. We already know what the last row is. Leave a comment for you. Output last row from import table. I'm going to leave most of these comments in here for you guys so that when you download the worksheet or the workbook, you can follow along and understand what everything is. All right, so now we got it. Let's go back here. Let's run it. Let's see what happens. We can see here we don't have anything so far, just the titles. And over here, all this stuff. Alt F8, run. Now I wonder what happened. Looks like we got this, so just a copy of this. Now the reason that 2 things happened, 1 is that we got this row, and 2 is that we only got one of them, is because, let's go back to our macro, this loop is copying everything to the exact same cell. So I told it to go to row 2. I told it down here to go to row 2 because we have a header over here in row 1. So I wanted it to start in row 2. However, all the data that's copied over each row, remember, this works for each new row in the loop, but this over here, this cell stays the same. So all we did was overwrite our data. So what we can do is find the last row of the destination worksheet. So kind of like we did for the import worksheet, now we're going to do it for the destination worksheet. So down here, let's do this. Get last row for destination sheet. And we do it the same way that we did last time. So I'm going to go ahead and call this raw last row. We do sheets, raw. Let's go ahead and use the cells, rows dot count 1 dot end Excel up dot row. So this seems confusing, but the more often you use it, it will just be easier. So now we have the last row from the raw worksheet. Now, this is in the loop. Make sure it's in the loop, because as you continue to add data to the raw worksheet, the last row will change. So you want this to run each time before you copy your data. So now we go over here, and I can delete the 2, and I can tell it to put it in this row, but you don't want to overwrite the last row. So you do want to do +1. And that +1 will allow you to put it in the next empty row. Now, if you wanted, you could put the +1 up here, and you could change the variable name to next empty row or whatever you wanted. But the point is, this gets you the last row, and then you increment that by 1 to get the next empty row. Go back here. Let's delete this. Run the macro again. Alt F8, enter. And there we go. Nice and neat and awesome. So, Thanos, Captain Morgan, Spider-Man, Thor, but then again, we have this stupid title right here. So how do we fix that? Easy peasy. You should kind of understand this by now. Actually, go back here. Row 1. We are currently going through row 1. This is what causes us to go through row 1, because we step through all the way up to row 1. If you don't want to go up to row 1, change it to 2. And there are many reasons why you may want to do this. Maybe your data table doesn't start until row 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or 25. And this is how you adjust that. So whatever number you're incrementing or decrementing to, you simply change that to there. So this is row 2. Our data starts on row 2 here. Now if I go and run the macro again, let's go ahead and delete these guys. There you go. No header row. Back to the VBA window. Now if you mess this up or forget which number you're putting up here, you can play around with it. You're not really going to hurt anything. It's just sets the boundaries for the loop, basically. Now that you know how to accurately copy the data from one worksheet to the next worksheet, I want to show you how to limit it based off of a condition. So I want to show you how to use a logical statement to check which value you want to copy over. So let's say you only want to copy over the records for Thanos. Let's go ahead and do that. Alt F11. And this is going to follow the same structure as the last tutorial, macro class 3. All that we're going to do, let's go down here and create it first, is if statement. So we want to create a nice, simple, easy if statement. Let's say copy only certain records. So if statement, super simple. If, now what do we want to check? Well, I want to check the name. So let's go cells I for the current row, column B because that's where the names are, and B is 2 for the column number, dot value. What do I want it to equal? Thanos. Okay. So if the name equals Thanos, then end if, that's the end of our if statement. Now we put all of our code here. Code goes here. So if it equals Thanos, then I want to copy it. So let's take this, take it out of there, delete that, go up here. Nice. Hit tab. All right, so I don't need to change any of this code here that we did to copy the data. All that can stay the same. All that I did was I put it inside this nice, neat little if container that says only run this code here that's inside of it if the value of this cell is equal to Thanos. So let's go back here. Let's delete all of this. Yay. Now run it and only the record for Thanos should come in. So Alt F8, enter. And it didn't work. Can you tell what I did wrong? This is a very common mistake to make when you're programming macros, and it's very good to illustrate this now. Let's go back to the VBA window. For the check for his name, I assumed that I was going to be on the worksheet with the raw data, with the imported data, sorry. With the imported data. So I would see his name there. And this only checks the currently visible worksheet. So here, when I run the macro, nothing. But if I go back here, run the macro, you can see that it has worked. So let's go ahead and fix that flaw right there. We want to tell it what worksheet to check for the record for Thanos. So sheets, import, dot cells. Now that little thing that I did right there is something that will plague you if you cause this issue in much larger macros, or write a macro and you assume someone's going to use it from one worksheet, and then you send it to a coworker or another person, and they just freak out because nothing's working like it should. So now with that little tiny change that I made, perfect. It does not matter what worksheet I'm on, it will work. Now in the previous tutorial I showed you how to do an else if and an else within the if statement, so I'm not going to show you that now. Go ahead and watch macro class 3 if you want to get that, but you can make the if statement larger and more complex to do something. If it equals Thanos here, and then if it doesn't equal Thanos, or if it equals another name, do this or do that. Really great thing. The if statement's a really great thing. Now the very last thing that I want to show you is how to remove the data that you've copied. So it's nice, we got all this data and it just goes over here on the raw worksheet, but it's still here, so I still have to delete it. It's very annoying. So let's fix that problem now. And it is so easy. Delete the copied data. Let's make sure we tell it what worksheet to delete it from this time. Sheets, import, dot, cells, I, comma, 1, close, dot, entire row, because we want to delete the entire row, and then we want to delete it, so delete. Sometimes it's kind of annoying how simple it is if you think about it. We want to go to this worksheet here, we want to go to this cell here, then using that cell we want to get the entire row, then we want to delete it. Now let's go ahead and let's test this out with Thanos, Alt F11, go over here, deletes you, buddy. Okay, now let's run the macro, Alt F8, enter. Thanos record is gone here, and it's magically appeared here. Nice, neat, awesome. Now you know how to have your data looped through, copied to another worksheet, and deleted from the import worksheet. Now I covered a lot of topics here, and I combined them to make something which I feel is useful. Instead of just teaching you, oh, here's the for loop, oh, in a separate tutorial, here's how you get the last row. I wanted to combine everything. But what you're going to get here is the for loop, and then how to go through it forward and backward, how to get the last row, how to put a variable in here for the number instead of hard coding it, and then how to go down here and use a condition to check which worksheet or which data that you want to copy over, and then how to copy that data using .copy, so simple. Then how to delete the copied data. Most important thing you can get from this tutorial is remember to declare the sheet. Now I kept it simple here by declaring the sheets in a very hard-coded way like this every time for import and then for raw. And I did that to make it easier for you to follow the tutorial and understand what's going on, because I think visually it's just a little bit more logical to say, okay, this is the worksheet we're using here, instead of setting this equal to a variable and putting the variable in right here, which I could have done. So when you start to make your own macros and make things more complex, you're going to want to set a variable equal to the sheets and also to some ranges as well, and declare that up here. I showed you a little bit of that in the macro 3 tutorial. But now, I promised I'd explain why we're going in reverse for this for loop. And I'll show you what happens if we don't go in reverse. Maybe that'll be easier. So we are deleting the data, right? Yes. Let's go ahead and get this guy back up here. Now, for the sake of this example, let's go ahead and add a Thanos record up here. Insert copied cells, shift cells down. I'll do it again. Okie dokie. All right, so now I have 2 Thanos records here and 1 Thanos record here. And I only want to copy the Thanos records. Let's go back here. Do you remember how to reverse this? If I remove the step, or I could just place the step like this and make it a 1. But let's just go ahead and remove it because I don't need it. I make the high number the very last one. So go all the way up to the last row. and then I make this one a 1. But I don't want to make it a 1 because the first row has headers, remember? I don't want it to go through that. In this case, it doesn't matter since I have a condition. It'll only copy Thanos records, but let's not risk it, so okay. Before I run it, notice we have 3 Thanos records here, no records over here. Alt F8, enter. Okay, that didn't work at all, did it? We have a Thanos record here. And if I go over here, we have 2 Thanos records. What happened? So what happened? We have our deletion being performed here inside of the loop. What that means is it finds the Thanos record in row 3, then it deletes row 3, then this record right here pops up 1. So if I make it like it was a moment ago, let's go to raw, cut the cells, go up here, and let's just put it in here. So let's start with this one. It's going down here and it found Thanos in row 5. It deleted Thanos from row 5. Then the data from row 6 moved up to row 5, but the loop counter, the macro, doesn't know that. So this Thanos record has now been moved up to row 5, but the loop has already incremented to go to row 6. So the loop is incremented to go to row 6 where Thanos used to be, but is no longer. And now Captain Morgan is there. So it's going down, dun dun dun. It sees this record, delete the record, okie dokie. Now it goes down, dun dun dun. Where's Thanos? Ah, okay, here's Thanos again. Delete the record, dun dun dun. It goes down again. And so see, it actually skipped Spider-Man and it skipped Thanos. We didn't notice when it skipped Spider-Man because we weren't looking for it. That's where problems can come up, because sometimes you don't know there's a problem until you have 2 records, one after the other. So I don't know if that was a confusing explanation or not, but play around with the example yourself by duplicating records and seeing if they all get copied over or not. But when we do all of this in reverse, why doesn't this happen? Very simple. We go up here, Captain Morgan, nope, don't want that. Thanos, yes, I do want that. So we delete 6. Okay, now Captain Morgan is moved into 6, but we don't care because the loop has already gone to 5. So in other words, it doesn't disrupt any of the data above it. And that's why it works. And that's why it deletes all of the entries. I'll leave this here just so you can play around with it and make sure that your loops are working correctly. Now let's go back here and let's make our loop go back the way we want it. So we want it to go backwards. We want to start at the last row and go to the first row of data. Now tell it to go backwards by 1 each time, so it goes backwards up through the rows. Now before somebody tells me that there's a better way to do this, I know. And that there's an easier way to delete the rows, I know. But when you're starting out with your 4th macro class, you don't really need to learn that because it can end up being a little bit too confusing. But what you could use down here, I'll tell you now so you can research it if you don't want to wait until the next tutorials, is you could have used a union to put all of the rows that you wanted to delete into a single variable, and then at the end, outside of the loop, you could have deleted all of those rows at once. But this is the easiest way to learn how to do this, and that's why I covered it this way. In later tutorials, I'll show you more complex ways to do all sorts of fun stuff. I hope you liked the tutorial. If it was helpful, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and make sure to subscribe and accept notifications so you can see all the new tutorials.